We're entertaining ourselves.
I was gonna say, you guys are having a great time in here. Well, good afternoon, everybody. House Democrats are going to continue to focus on what matters for the American people. We're going to continue to fight for lower costs, for safer communities, to grow the middle class, to make a difference in the lives of everyday Americans. That's what matters in terms of the work that should be happening here in the United States Capitol. House Democrats are fighting for everyday Americans. Extreme MAGA Republicans are fighting each other. And they are focused on the wrong things. Extreme MAGA Republicans focused on shutting down the government, which will hurt everyday Americans. Extreme MAGA Republicans focused on expunging the legitimate impeachments of the former president of the United States of America. Extreme MAGA Republicans are focused on inflicting pain and suffering on everyday Americans through draconian cuts that will hurt the health, the safety, and the economic well-being of the American people. So there's a clear contrast between the House Democratic focus on what matters for the American people. We're fighting to deliver more money, more time, more freedom to the American people. Extreme MAGA Republicans fighting each other and bending the knee to the former twice impeached President of the United States of America. Questions?
Thank you, Leader Jeffries. So what's your sense on the MilCon VA bill? Do you see it passing today? And then what do you make of tomorrow's session likely being canceled if you confirm that highway?
Well, that's a decision that will be made by the Republican majority, and I expect that there'll be some discussion of that sometime soon. In terms of the appropriations process that has been hijacked by the most extreme wing of the Republican Party, which is increasingly a majority. And as a result, instead of taking a bipartisan approach to figuring out how do we invest in the health, the safety, and the economic well-being of the American people, the extreme MAGA Republicans have hijacked every single one of these appropriations bills that it is our responsibility to pass in order to march toward a nationwide ban on abortion, to target communities of color, to ban books, to bully members of the LGBTQ community, and to try and erode the social safety net that is so important to the American middle class.
Thank you.
Can we stay on approach for a second? On the way over, I was talking to one of your colleagues who's done a bunch of these spending fights, and his concern was just how little has been done up to this point. Obviously, we've all heard from Republicans who are trying to say that shutting down the government's not a big deal. In some ways, it even plays for them. What are your conversations with your colleagues about if anything can be done to avert this, what you're planning for in terms of messaging this to the American people? Because right now it seems like it's highly likely that you see a shutdown.
Well, the extreme MAGA Republicans are marching the American people and the Congress toward a government shutdown. It's in their DNA. The extreme MAGA Republicans have shut down the government repeatedly to try to extract extreme ransom demands from the Congress in order to jam their extreme right-wing ideology down the throats of the American people. And that's the moment that we're in right now. And it's a shame because we don't have to be in this place. President Biden negotiated a resolution of the GOP manufactured default crisis where we all agreed to top-line spending numbers that would allow us to complete the spending agreements and appropriations bills necessary to sustain the government and allow the government to be there for the American people. But the extreme MAGA Republicans have decided that they're walking away from their own agreement because They'd rather appease the extremists within their conference and try to jam their right-wing ideology down the throats of the American people to undermine the health, the safety, and the economic well-being of the American people. As Democrats, we're going to continue to focus on what matters, on a healthy economy, on building an economy from the middle out and the bottom up and not the top down, on fighting for the American people to receive more money, more time to spend with their family and friends, and more freedom, not less, which is what the Republicans are trying to accomplish.
Mr. Jeffries, we're going into the presidential election campaign season now, and President Biden, well, he wants to get his messaging out there. It appears that his son's issues, whether it's legal, that's sort of, it appears to be dragging down his campaign. Also, he was dealing with the fact that he is not acknowledging the fact that he has a seventh grandchild. Do you think that A, should he acknowledge his seventh grandchild, and B, do you think that his legal issues are dragging down his campaign going into the 2024 campaign cycle?
Yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about in terms of the second part of your question. As it relates to the first part, President Biden's track record of success on the economy speaks for itself. More than 13 million good paying jobs have been created because of the leadership of President Biden in partnership with House and Senate Democrats. Unemployment at historic lows. Wages are going up, inflation is coming down. Stock market is going up, gas prices have come down. Economic growth and development in the second quarter exceeded expectations. And so by any measure, President Biden has led the charge in creating a healthy economy for the middle class and all those who aspire rightfully to be part of the middle class and the great American dream. So he's going to have a phenomenal story to tell. And oh, by the way, illegal border crossings are down. As I mentioned, inflation coming down, gas prices down. And so the American people understand when folks are trying to distract the public. And because the extreme MAGA Republicans don't have the ability to talk about the economy, and over the last 7 months have done nothing to improve the economy, no focus on affordability, no extreme MAGA Republican focus on the economy or on inflation or on safer communities. Today we're voting on chickens and bats. That's the centerpiece of your agenda? Your affirmative agenda is chickens and bats?
Dragging down his campaign whatsoever?
No. Thanks.
Three of your ranking members earlier this week introduced a bill aimed at lowering drug prices, Neil, Pallone, and Scott. I know you talked a lot about lowering costs. Do you plan to sign on to that bill, and do you think that would be a key part of the Democratic campaign message in 2024?
I certainly support the effort to continue to fight for affordability for everyday Americans. And we've done a tremendous job in moving the needle on that issue and lowering costs in a variety of different ways, including by dropping the high price of life-saving prescription drugs, such as insulin, which, as of last year, cost the American people approximately $4,000 a year and has now been dropped to $35 a month. And what Chairman Pallone and Chairman Neal, Chairman Bobby Scott, the once and future chairman of these very important committees, are trying to do is to continue to build upon the great work that has been done as it relates to lowering costs, moving beyond what has happened with insulin, and bringing those savings to a broader part of the American economy. And I strongly support that effort. Chad?
Thank you. On redistricting, you've spoken about what happened last time, and I know the special master is closer to Toronto and Cleveland and New York City, et cetera.
And Pittsburgh.
And Pittsburgh. It sounds like most of the National League Central, et cetera. With redistricting, what did Democrats in New York fail to do properly last time? And specifically, what are they doing differently this time? Because redistricting could make the difference in a narrowly divided House, especially in one state, your home state?
All we want is fair maps to be drawn all across the country. We want a fair map in Alabama, a fair map in Louisiana, fair maps in North Carolina and Ohio, in Wisconsin, certainly fair maps in New York. In the case of my home state, I think it's important that the Independent Redistricting Commission, which is bipartisan in nature, be given the opportunity to complete its work, to try to find common ground and present a congressional map to the legislature that gives every community, urban New York, suburban New York, rural New York, an opportunity to have its voices heard in deciding what the congressional delegation emerging from New York should look like. And so I think my only hope is that extreme MAGA Republicans who hijacked the process last year by going forum shopping in Steuben County, selecting a extreme partisan right-wing judge who then brought in an out-of-town special master who had no clue about communities of interest throughout New York State, and then they stuck us with this map. Thankfully, the appellate division in New York State has said the process that was short-circuited should resume so that the Independent Redistricting Commission that has Democratic appointees and Republican appointees should reconvene, hear from New Yorkers all across the state, and then present a fair map to be enacted by the legislature.
What did Democrats in New York do that, led to that process? I mean, I've heard some people and members of your delegation I've spoken to said, look, we have 5 gavels. We had you as the caucus chair. We have Schumer, and none of that made a difference. They said that should have made a difference in getting these maps in favor of the Democrats, and that would have meant control of the House.
Well, in New York, unlike in other states, we don't have partisan gerrymandering running rampant. We have a process that was voted on by the people of New York State that should be followed. And that process involves an independent redistricting commission drawing the map. And unfortunately, the courts stepped in to that process, stripped away the ability of the Independent Redistricting Commission and ultimately the legislature to decide what a fair map should look like. And that's what left us with the situation that we now find ourselves in, with a map unfairly, unreasonably, unacceptably drawn by an out-of-town special master who has no clue about communities of interest. By the way, you just had the Supreme Court say that communities of color should have an opportunity to make a fair decision about who represents them in the United States Congress. That's the U.S. Supreme Court, a decision written by the conservative Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. This out-of-town special master in New York State, the maps that we currently are operating under, eroded and degraded the Black and Latino population in 5 different congressional districts. Degraded the Black population in the congressional district currently represented by Jamal Bowman. Degraded the Black population in the congressional district that I currently represent. Degraded the Black population in the congressional district represented by Yvette Clarke. Degraded the Black population in the congressional district currently represented by Greg Meeks. And decimated the Latino population, degraded it in the congressional district currently represented by Nydia Velasquez. How is that possible when the percentage of New Yorkers who come from communities of color in the last decade increased? It didn't decrease. And in 5 different congressional districts, this out-of-town special master drew a rubber stamped by a right-wing judge from Steuben County that actually went in the opposite direction than that suggested by the United States Supreme Court. So we're here because the Court of Appeals, in its prior iteration, made, in my view, an erroneous decision. I'm thankful that the process, which will be a fairer one, is back on track. Thanks.
Yesterday, we saw a hearing that some consider to be out of this world, talking about UAPs.
Did you practice that?
And one thing that stood out to a lot of people was how partisan politics seemed to almost be put completely to the side
Yeah.
in this hearing. Why can't we see that more often here in Congress?
Well, I do think that one of the unspoken stories of President Biden's successful leadership has been that many of the legislative items that have been so important to improving the health and the safety, the economic well-being of the American people, creating a healthy economy, were done in a bipartisan way. That's not often broadcast with the volume that other more confrontational aspects of what we do here in Congress are broadcast. I think that's unfortunate to some degree because it communicates to the American people that we aren't consistently trying to find common ground. Under the leadership of President Biden, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, we were able to find bipartisan consensus on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, find bipartisan consensus largely in the Senate than in the House, but bipartisan consensus on the Safer Communities Act to get gun safety legislation over the finish line for the first time in 30 years, bipartisan consensus on the CHIPS and Science Act to bring domestic manufacturing jobs back home to the United States of America, bipartisan consensus on the PACT Act so we could stand up for our veterans who have served our country in such an extraordinary way, but have suffered through toxic exposure as a result of their service, bipartisan consensus on the Respect for Marriage Act to ensure that people can marry who they want, when they want, where they want in the United States of America. And so I do think that our view as House Democrats, the view of President Biden, the Senate Democrats, will continue to be, let's find common ground whenever and wherever possible. We're not just saying it, we've done it. And we want to continue to do it. However, as I've also made clear, we are going to confront extremism whenever necessary. Unfortunately, the extreme MAGA Republicans, who now constitute the majority in the House of Representatives, are out of control and uninterested in solving real problems on behalf of the American people because they'd rather focus on peddling conspiracy theories, impeaching President Biden, or shutting down the government.
Today, President Biden is rolling out new initiatives to help Americans deal with extreme heat. Republicans recently have characterized the president as having a climate fetish. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I haven't heard that phrase before, but it is no surprise. I mean, I think some of these folks, instead of focusing on solving problems for the American people, are in some diabolical laboratory trying to cook up phrases to undermine President Biden and people who are actually trying to solve problems on behalf of the American people. The climate crisis is real. We see it all over the country and all throughout the world. We've made some progress in that regard. The Inflation Reduction Act represents the largest investment in countering the climate crisis ever enacted in the history of the world. And that was done under the leadership of President Biden to set our planet on a sustainable trajectory forward, meaningfully combat the climate crisis, and stand up a clean energy economy that will allow for the creation of good paying jobs that will benefit people all across the country. That's responsible leadership that has been brought to us by President Biden. You got many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who don't believe that the climate crisis is real, and they continue to bury their heads in the sand, perhaps because some of them are in the pocket of big oil.
One quick follow-up. Any concerns about meeting climate goals? Today, the Supreme Court green-lighted the construction of the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Are you at all concerned about this?
I think that it's an all hands on deck moment here in America and throughout the world, and combating the climate crisis should not be a partisan issue because extreme weather events hit blue states and they hit red states. This should be an American issue, not a partisan issue. And I'm thankful that we have someone in the White House, President Biden, who is taking the climate crisis seriously and is leading the charge on decisive action.
But the president has been pretty firm about specific climate goals and emission goals. Are you concerned that those goals can still be met?
Yes, I believe that they will be met because of the leadership of President Biden and a growing consensus throughout America, even if not here in the Congress, that the climate crisis is a real issue to be tackled, not as a partisan issue, not as a Democratic issue, or an issue for the Republicans to oppose, but as an American issue.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. I have two questions. The first being, what are your thoughts on Florida rewriting history and teaching students that Black people benefited from slavery?
Well, slavery was a racist, oppressive, evil crime against humanity. Slavery was not designed to benefit African Americans who were enslaved in an inhumane fashion. It was a crime against humanity. It involved rape and kidnap and torture and lynchings and exploitation and family separation. Did not benefit anyone. And to the extent that there are people here in America who are trying to deny the ability for that story to be told, or in fact want to rewrite history and say that slavery benefited the people who were victims of enslavement, that's outrageous, that's unacceptable. And they're either ignorant at best or at worst intentionally trying to take us backward and turn back the clock.
And secondly, what do you make of your party's kind-hearted response to Mitch McConnell's health scare when compared to how Senator John Fetterman was mocked by Republicans when he suffered a stroke?
Well, Democrats are going to continue to be the party of decency, led by Joe Biden, who is fundamentally and inherently a decent man who cares about others. And I think it was wonderful to see at an event that I also participated in last night, Leader McConnell there. And he wasn't just there, but he spoke eloquently. And we will continue to wish him nothing but the best of health.
Thank you.
Thanks. First row? Yeah, thanks.
There's some reporting suggesting that former President Trump could be indicted for January 6 related issues very soon. How concerned are you about the prospect for protests here at the Capitol? And do you want staff to work from home, as some Democratic offices did when previous indictments came down?
Well, I have full confidence in the Sergeant at Arms, as well as the Capitol Police, to make sure that they will continue to provide a safe and secure environment for staff, for visitors, as well as for the members of Congress who serve in this institution. Never again should we see a violent assault on the Capitol take place. An assault, by the way, that there's every reason to believe was incited by the former twice impeached insurrectionist in chief and former president of the United States of America. It's my hope that former President Trump will behave responsibly moving forward, but I'm not holding my breath. This is why it will be important for those Republicans who currently serve in the House or in the Senate to walk away from the big lie, from the notion that President Trump should be sitting at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue right now. They should walk away from the notion that the election was stolen from Donald Trump. It was not. In terms of the Electoral College, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump like a piñata. Wasn't close. He won in state after state after state that were central to a decisive Electoral College victory. And Joe Biden got more than 80 million votes throughout the country. And it was the big lie that led to the violent insurrection. In terms of the court case, at the end of the day, it's my view that the system should just be allowed to work as intended. And that means that the prosecutors and whatever judges may preside over the various court cases, as well as the defense attorneys, follow the facts, apply the law, be guided by the Constitution. All right, last two questions. Kevin, and then
Your meeting with Secretary Mayorkas, Mayor Adams, and others this afternoon, what is your hope for outcome of that meeting? Obviously, this comes as we're seeing the migrant situation in New York. And then separately, do you have a status update on the George Santos censure resolution? Cynically, is the fact that we haven't seen it invoked yet because we've seen New York Republicans come out and say they vote for it, thus giving them some cover electorally.
yeah, there's no reason to believe anything relative to votes on the floor of the House of Representatives that is being said by the so-called moderate Republicans from New York, because on issue after issue, including as it relates to the expulsion resolution brought against George Santos, my Republican colleagues in New York publicly said Santos should be gone. He's not fit to serve in the United States House of Representatives. And the first opportunity they received to actually be responsive to their public commitments to throw George Santos out of Congress, they did the exact opposite. They buried accountability for George Santos with the Ethics Committee, and then said that they were promised that the Ethics Committee would act within 60 days. Time's up. Those 60 days have passed. And yet, not a single House Republican from New York has actually stepped forward to say, it's time for Congress to act, to hold George Santos accountable, because he's a serial fraudster who is not fit to serve in the House. As far as I'm concerned, the accountability related to George Santos should be dealt with by the House Republicans. In terms of the censure resolution, that's a question that is best directed at this point in time to Congressman Richie Torres as it relates to his thoughts on timing. So with respect to the meeting with the Secretary, I'm looking forward to a conversation about how we can address issues that are uniquely specific to New York City in terms of the volume of migrants who have arrived over the last several months. And I think Mayor Adams has done the best job that he can, making sure that, consistent with who we are as a city that embraces immigrants, that tries to treat folks with the decency and respect that they deserve as they are awaiting their day in court. But we are going to have to get some assistance from us here in Congress, from the federal government, in terms of alleviating some of the burden that has disproportionately fallen on the city of New York. I'm thankful for the presence of Secretary Mayorkas in terms of this conversation. We're looking forward to it. And it's another indication that the administration is going to continue to be there for the city of New York in the best way possible. Last question, thanks.
Following up on artificial intelligence, I know you had a meeting with the speaker this week. You said more to come, stay tuned. I'm wondering if you can give us an update on what to expect on that front. And are you concerned, given punting on appropriations, NDAA, all of the must-pass bills, that artificial intelligence is going to get squeezed from the legislative agenda?
Well, it's my hope that we're going to be able to find a path forward in terms of working on the artificial intelligence issue in a bipartisan way. Speaker McCarthy has been a partner in that regard in terms of his vision and his leadership for addressing the challenges that we will confront as a nation around the development and explosive growth of AI in a bipartisan way. And I think we're going to be able to continue to work together as Democrats and Republicans to be able to find some common ground and take some legislative steps forward, hopefully in the months to come, to strike the right balance between making sure that the United States maintains its competitive advantage on artificial intelligence and allows for the development of the technology in ways that can be beneficial to humanity, particularly in areas like healthcare and disease prevention and eradication, while at the same time making sure that we can impose some guardrails that would allow for the prevention of bad actors from stepping into the artificial intelligence arena, taking advantage of the technology to inflict harm on the American people. That's a balance that I think we have to strike. And I'm encouraged and optimistic that we're going to be able to find the common ground. Speaker McCarthy has been very clear in wanting to work together with Democrats on this issue. And I look forward to what's to come. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.